Okay, here we are in week 4. We're looking at the second part of what is culture. And now we're going to be looking at more specifically, away from necessarily the bare bones part of what culture is, and looking at technology. We're going to look at cultural changes and diversity, and then consider the theoretical perspectives, functionalism, conflict. We'll look at symbolic interactionism and postmodern. And then lastly, we'll just touch on a bit about where might culture be in the future, what role might it play, or how might it be different. Okay, so I hope you find this useful. Good luck for everything that's going on with you. I hope your semester's unwinding very well, and let's carry on.
Okay, on this section here we're going to look at a variety of things, but most notably we're going to look at theories. But I was going to start with technology, cultural change, and diversity, some terms you should be familiar with. Now the first term we're looking at is cultural shock. And cultural shock is something that if you've ever done any traveling, chances are you've experienced this. Or if people have come to Canada that you've met, you'll have this experience. This is the disorientation that people feel when they encounter cultures that are radically different from their own. Now this can't always be as dramatic as what we're seeing on the screen there. My girlfriend has 3 international students who live with her for the semester at Georgian College in Barrie, and one is from Italy, one from Armenia, and one from Brazil. And now they're not radically different than here in Canada, and yet their culture shock is around the availability of goods and services and the kinds of goods and services that you can purchase, the cost of things, the weather, that period of few days to a week that was high humidity they just didn't understand. And so culture shock isn't necessarily about dramatically different, but when they are different from your own and you don't know quite what to do with the new experience. Then we also have what we call ethnocentrism. And this is something that is a term that is used to describe the tendency to regard your own culture or your own group as the standard of all cultures or all groups, and thus superior, whereas all other groups are inferior. So when we look at a culture that appears different from ours, like the one you see on the screen, we look at them and say, well, gee whiz, if they would just do this or do that, or they can't be as well off as we are because we're using our culture as a standard. We don't view the world from their perspective and the happiness they may have and their ability to cope within the world that they live in. So that being ethnocentrism. Now there's a positive and negative view of what you could use ethnocentrism. If you're singing the school song, a pledge to your flag, or cheering on your team, that's ethnocentristic behavior that's not bad. If you're thinking that your group is superior over another cultural group, that's where you're using ethnocentrism in the negative. Now there is a term that's called cultural relativity. Behaviors and customs of any culture must be viewed and analyzed by that own culture standard. And so for me to understand Leandro's perspective, he's the young student from Brazil. My view of Brazil is of being a sort of an oceanside, you think of Rio, and that's my view of Brazil. But he doesn't live on the ocean. He lives deeper inland and doesn't see the ocean. So his experience of Brazil, which is normal for him, I need to view his experience as a Brazilian more from his perspective because I have a very limited view of what is Brazil. So when we look at ethnocentrism in this comic, sort of describes sort of two cultures viewing each other by their own standard. Now, within any culture, culture goes through changes. It doesn't remain the same forever. And so it goes through changes. And one of those, there's 3 sort of triggers for change. One is discovery. This is something previously unknown or unrecognized. And so vaccines for diseases are sometimes considered discoveries. Now, when we heard about the Ebola concern over in Liberia, And when we started to see it grow and grow exponentially, it became a very big concern. Now, normally this takes a long time for a discovery for a vaccine to occur. But when it started to go more international, then many groups started to work extremely rapidly and developed a vaccine for Ebola. And so that's a discovery of something that was previously unknown or unrecognized and developed. Now, an alternative way to change cultures is through invention. This is where you're reshaping existing cultural ideas into new forms. So when we had the steam engine, it created the opportunity to mechanize factories and create locomotive trains, and then that stimulated the prospect for cars. When we had some of the first computers back in the 1950s, it's even arguable that the first computer goes back even further than that. But we've now got ourselves into all sorts of devices that do so many things that we never thought we could never imagine in the past. And then lastly, we can look at diffusion. Diffusion would be the transmission of cultural items or social practices from one culture to another. McDonald's was a North American-based food industry, and now we find McDonald's everywhere, including like in Japan, or pizza in India. Music is so diverse, it's diffuse. It goes from culture to culture, and it's influencing one another constantly and all the time. Now, cultural diversity is a very important element. It's the wide range of cultural differences that can be found between and within nations. Now, you can have two different kinds of cultural diversity. You have a homogeneous. Sweden is very homogeneous. One language, one ethnicity, and religion, and the like. It's just one of anything. So in Sweden and the Netherlands, it's a lot of not a lot of diverse cultural groups, one sort of strong cultural group. Whereas in Canada, we have a more heterogeneous, many languages, many ethnic groups, and many religions. Canada, over the past 150 years, 13 million people have come to Canada. And so they haven't all come from Anglo-Saxon backgrounds. So it makes us more heterogeneous. Another element that's included in looking at cultures are what we call subcultures and countercultures. Subcultures are groups of people who share a distinctive set of cultural beliefs and behaviors that differ from the main larger culture in some significant ways. Now, the example you see here are Mennonites and Hutterites. These people live their life in Canada by a lot of other Canadian standards, but they have some distinct differences in the way that they do things. The subculture of the Hutterites, they're able to keep their culture while adopting to technology and modern agriculture. Now, countercultures, this is a group that strongly rejects dominant society values and norms and seeks an alternative lifestyle. Back in the 50s, that was the beatniks. In the 60s, it was the hippies. And we see neo-Nazi skinheads as being an example, Al-Qaeda groups as being an example of countercultures. So these exist within every culture. It's not just sort of an example that fits within our own. Okay, let's look at some of the theories of how the theorists look at culture. We'll start with functionalists. The structural functionalists look at the significant part that values and norms play in terms of how the values and norms, can be the glue that holds society together. Cultures function to meet people's needs. Now, what is meant by this is we have biological and physical needs that can be met through our culture, food, procreation. We also have instrumental needs. These would be, instrumental needs would be things like laws, education. And then there'd be integrative needs, and culture contributes to our integrative needs by providing opportunities for religious expression, art expression, and one of the things that structural functionalists also include in a variety of elements of their theories is the concept of dysfunction. that discord, violence in media, and the like may promote antisocial behavior. And so this kind of keeps the growth, if you will, or the development of culture as an ongoing and ever-changing kind of an experience. Now with conflict theory, we see the main perspective as being the assumption that social life is a continuous struggle in which members of powerful groups seek to control the scarce resources. These ideas came from Karl Marx. Values and norms help create and sustain the privileged positions in society and excluding all others. Mass media conglomerates such as AOL, Time Warner, Disney, and Viacom create popular culture through films, shows, and amusement parks about what we're supposed to desire and how we're supposed to value things and what things we should be buying and purchasing. They function to promote the increased consumption of commodities that people believe they need. Now, by way of an example, I'm going to show you something kind of on the quick here. Okay, this is Unilever's website. Now, Unilever has a lot of products. These are only seeing a few of them here. But two in particular I want to draw your attention to. Dove. So they are promoters of the Dove campaign for beauty. And if you look at what they say here, they're committed to helping women raise their personal, and if we carry on, personal perspective on themselves, trying to see that beauty is not something that is what they trying to promote. It's finding your own sense of beauty. It's not about buying into the hype about what women are supposed to look like and how they're supposed to behave. But at the same time, they also have Axe. And if you've seen the Axe commercials, they seem to be completely an antithesis, the opposite of the Dove campaign, and yet it's all part of the same company. So part of my point of introducing this is to say, here's a company that makes an awful lot of money, and they're trying to promote different things that you should enjoy, even though they seem to be taking a different approach. How genuine can they be about their Dove campaign if they have the Axe campaign the way they do? It's just something to think about. Okay. Symbolic interactionalists, they look at culture quite a bit differently. In terms of the functionalists and conflict theorists, they see things at a macro level. That is to say that they look at the bigger picture. Symbolic interactionalists, they look at the micro level. They look at the small scale, the face-to-face interactions that people have. So this is focused on the relationship between symbols and us. Key to the theory is that society is the sum of all people's interactions, and it's these interactions people create, maintain, and modify the culture in their daily lives. So values and norms are not independent realities that automatically determine our behavior, they think. Rather, we tend to reinterpret them in each situation we encounter. So when you think of the value of symbols and our meanings of them, you look at birthday parties, you look at weddings, they're full of symbolism and how they represent what's important to us. Every family celebrates a birthday a little bit differently. So in terms of symbolic interactionalists, it's the individual families and how they celebrate birthdays or how they have wedding ceremonies occur, and that is the reality of the varying versions, if you will, of culture, say, even in Canada. And so symbolic interactionalists are interested in the symbols and how we interpret them. If I were to reach out to shake your hand and you stomped on my foot, I'd probably reevaluate my gesture and the meaning that it has in the future. There's my hand, and you step on my foot. I'm probably going to think twice about whether or not I'm going to continue to do that. Now, postmodern, this is another macro perspective. And here what they're focused on is that because of it's such a Eurocentric lens that conditions our view of all cultures, that the culture of our age produces a social world that's not really real. They tend to look at it as being simulated. Because in a sense, you can't speak about individual cultures, you need to speak about a cultures. It means that there aren't a bunch of individuals. We're so interconnected through social media, we're so interconnected through economics, that to look at culture of individual countries is a misnomer. They think we should speak in terms of cultures. Some of these insights about creating a false sense of reality because of how much time is spent in what is called a hypermedia. In terms of what is called media creates, in terms of the post-modern perspective, a hyper-reality. We begin to live in a situation where the simulation of reality is more real to us than the phenomena themselves. We get so disconnected from reality that it's hard to determine what is real and not real from the postmodern perspective. Some of their examples would include the Disney theme parks, where we become survivors of over major obstacles, or we have an appearance of power, but we really don't have any, and we live for a few moments without fear of crime and violence. It's a very protected reality from postmodern perspective. Now, if we look to the future in culture, well, we might find a variety of some potential predictions that cultural diversity is going to continue to grow. Technology, especially television, radio, videos, media, will have a continued and profound effect on our culture. Do we have a cultural freedom, or is it symbolic? And most of the world's people, however, are going to be able to participate in this technology. Will there be concern with the basic subsistence? It's hard to determine where culture will be and where culture will go. But certainly, culture is an important identifier of countries and their identity. Well, I hope this has been helpful, and good luck on your studies, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.